University of Edinburgh Staff Pride Network for LGBT+ colleagues and allies. This event is for staff and students of the University of Edinburgh, and you'll all be familiar with our dignity and respect policy that governs everything that we do here at the university, and we expect you to keep that in mind. Even though this is obviously an evening event, we're still on university campus. My role tonight is just to give you a few housekeeping points. So if you need the toilet at any point, please just leave. There are gendered toilets on this floor as well as disabled, and there's a gender neutral toilet on the floor above us. And we don't expect there to be any fire alarms, so if there is an alarm, please treat it as real, and we will direct you to leave via the fire exits at the top there, and just, be calm about it. By way of overview of the event this evening, I will be handing over to Gina to give an introduction for our speaker very shortly. Katy will then give her presentation, and we'll be joined by our other co-chair for the evening, Deborah Kayambi, the University of Edinburgh Rector, to manage our question and answer section. You'll see on the screen at the moment there's a QR code. This is one route for you to submit questions to Katy, so if you think of them while she's speaking, you can do them like this, but you can also raise your hand at the end of her talk, and Deborah will manage questions in the room. We will be somewhat tight for time because we have to finish at 9, so just be mindful that we might not be able to get to everybody. I want to also make sure that I thank the many people that made this event possible. It takes a huge amount of work to bring together an external speaker like this, and you will have noticed the presence of campus security, and I want to make particular thanks to them for helping us to ensure that it can go ahead safely. I must thank REPHRAIN and UCU Edinburgh for providing funds to support the event. In the Staff Pride Network itself, I need to thank our fantastic comms team, Kathy, Robbie, Dom and Ali, for promoting the event throughout the university, on our social media, etc., and our mailing list. Also our social events volunteers, Sarah and Jonathan, for coordinating behind the scenes and supporting the ticket checking today. Merlin, our trans and non-binary rep, for consulting on the development of the event and other aspects of the management. And other volunteers who supported with checking tickets tonight, Chloe and Hannah, who you may have met on the door. We also have great help from Lighthouse Books today, Mari and Robin, who are managing our live stream, and so hello to our online viewers who can be watching from their homes. And I also need to thank, obviously, Deborah for stepping in to help us chair this event, and she will be joining us probably later. Finally, and it would be completely remiss if I overlooked this person, I need to give a really, really special thanks to Gina. She's gone above and beyond in liaising with all of the components that are necessary to make this event happen. And so a very special thanks has to go to you, Gina. And I'm now going to hand over to your much more capable hands to give our speaker a proper introduction. So thank you, Gina.
We are living in the middle of a moral panic against trans people in the UK. These are not just my words, they are the words of international bodies like the Council of Europe and Amnesty International. They are the words of respected feminist scholars like Sarah Ahmed and Alison Phipps, as well as those working directly in the fields of queer studies and trans studies. This moral panic, reflected in the growth in hate crime against trans people and in the exponential increases in the traditional news media's campaign over the past 6 years to demonize trans people and any rights that trans people fight for. For this reason too, it is a moral panic in which trans voices have been locked outside the mainstream, seldom seen or heard, but on a daily basis, relentlessly discussed. For this reason, we should understand the significance of the talk this evening. Here at the University of Edinburgh, we are using our privileged position and status to acknowledge those voices locked outside elite institutions, be it the institutions of the government, the media, and academia. In the discussion about free speech, constructed largely by the forces of conservatism, here perhaps is a truly meaningful understanding of free speech, of elite institutions creating space to listen to representatives of vulnerable minorities, to speak up and give their account of their oppression. A redistribution of free speech if only fleetingly, here and now. For this evening, the voice of our guest speaker will inform you about the kind of campaigns of anti-trans hate the traditional media has spent the last 6 years denying or obscuring. This voice will also describe an anti-hate movement whose reputation a transphobic national news media has spent the last 6 years attempting to either ignore or obscure or sanitize. Here in the privileged space of the University of Edinburgh, it is we who are truly privileged to listen to a voice so likably brilliant for it to have shattered through the gatekeeping of the traditional media via the less restricted pathways of new media, of the internet, to tell you the inconvenient truth of what it's like to be trans in the UK at the moment. That voice, of course, belongs to our special guest, Katy Montgomerie. With her huge online following, Katy has emerged within just a few years as one of the most exciting and significant transmedia figures to have mastered the new media of the internet in the UK and the larger Anglophone global north. Her versatility is worth highlighting. Her cartoon Twitter account, titled Katy's Shit Cartoons, brilliantly encapsulates the inanity of anti-trans campaigning, prolifically blogging on Medium and on her website. Katy is responsible for one of the finest satires that subverts anti-trans rhetoric ever typed to screen with her article, Should Cis People Have the Same Rights as Everyone Else?, in which Katy appropriates anti-trans strategies of extrapolating from examples of dangerous cis people, such as Charles Manson and Myra Hindley, and other cis mass murderers to debate whether we should take cis people's rights away. As well as satire, one can see how Katy has honed her ability to argue on behalf of trans rights in her characteristically personable, formidably informative, yet direct and economical style. Katy engages with anti-trans voices on her weekly transatlantic call-in show. She produces videos about anti-trans output online. Yet perhaps Katy's skills are most apparent as a regular contributor on trans-inclusive online and current affairs channels, including Novara Media, the Owen Jones YouTube channel, and LBC with Natasha Devon. Able to condense and elucidate an understanding of trans policy making with just a few clear sentences, typified by her brilliant contribution this week on the Owen Jones channel in explaining the gender recognition reform, Katy has noticeably begun to appear with increasing frequency this past month in traditional news media, as if there is a recognition that the damaging implications of the UK's government handling of trans rights requires people who actually know what they're talking about. And it is in recognition of her knowing what she's talking about, as well as her increasing importance as a media figure, that Katy has made the long journey up to the north, at a time when the trans community, including at the University of Edinburgh, desperately needs something good to cheer. Honoured guests, please give a very warm round of applause to our special guest this evening, Katy Montgomerie.
Like if I do this, I can hold this one. Sorry for the faff, everyone. Right, so if I start slipping down, just tell me. So welcome to my talk, my second ever live talk, very exciting, which is Combating Online Hate and the Gender Critical Movement. So I've just had quite an introduction, but you might be wondering who I am and why I'm here. Or like maybe if you want to put it in a bit more of a polite way, here is Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, gender critical activist, saying, and what about this odd woman Katy Montgomerie? What has bitten her? So, what has bitten me is, I argue on the internet. That is why I'm here. Basically, 7 years ago, I started disagreeing with transphobic people, and now I'm here. So don't do that too much or it might happen to you. I'm also very passionate feminist and LGBT rights activist. I have a number of internet shows, which Gina was very kindly just hyping up for me. There's a few that are quite alright. I'm also an atheist activist, and I'm the host of an atheist call-in show called Talk Heathen, and I've also been on some of the other big ones, which is quite cool. It's like a good place to go for like easy arguing compared to the stress of arguing about LGBT rights. I'm also the guitarist in a death metal band, if anyone's interested. Check us out. And I'm also an engineer for my normal job. So yeah, cool. So we're going to be discussing online hate and how to beat it. There is a content warning. We're going to cover some of this stuff. I'll probably mention it. I'm not going to go into horrible gory detail, but there will be a lot of slurs, but not said by me, so we won't get banned on YouTube. But we'll just be dealing with them in a light-hearted way, I hope. And we're going to end on a positive note for like how to beat this stuff. So hopefully it won't be too overwhelming for anyone. But if you need to get up and leave, I won't be offended. If you just think it's rubbish and need to go, I also won't be offended. So an overview of this talk, we're going to be discussing my experiences and then the community experiences of hate. To say why am I even here and why we're talking about this. And what the effects that has on people, which I think is quite important to emphasize. Then we're going to be discussing causes, and that's largely going to be a discussion of the gender critical movement. Shout out to anyone here. And then we're going to be discussing how to beat it, not just the gender critical movement, but hate in general. So yeah, and because there's a heavy topic, I'm going to break it up with cat pictures. This is my cat Poppy. If you stay to the end, her Instagram handle is there, and you can follow her. So yeah, there's like 5 or 6 pictures, so it's like the time breaks. It'll be fine. But yeah, hopefully she will lighten the mood. So we're going to start off with my experiences. So this is kind of the reason why I feel qualified to be here, although not strictly qualified at all, is because I've experienced a lot of hate. I'm a prominent like feminist and LGBT rights activist and trans woman on the internet, which if you are one of those or you've ever seen one of those, you probably know get like a hilarious amount of hate. It's be very accurate to say someone is writing something about me hateful like 24/7, like constantly. On Twitter, there is someone writing something hateful about me. Every single thing I post, every day, just constantly. And so I feel like that's why, I can discuss that, and we'll go into that in a second. But I've talked about this quite a lot on YouTube, and I've written it, like to read and stuff quite a lot. But it is definitely different looking people in the eye and talking about these things. So sorry if it gets a bit awkward, and also sorry if I'm like smiling and talking about these horrible things. But it's kind of my way of dealing with it, but also I've processed a lot of this already, so it's not so stressful for me now. But anyway, here are some of the things I've experienced. Online hate as part of doing activism for trans rights. So I've been doxxed, I've had my personal pictures stolen, I've had death threats, and obviously any death threats are horrible, but there is a range, it's like a connoisseur of death threats, and there's anonymous teenager says, I'm going to kill you or whatever on the internet. They're not nice, but then there's also like someone leaves multiple 10-minute long voicemails describing how they're going to attack you, or someone from your city says if they ever see you, you won't be able to walk again. That kind of thing is more stressful. I feel like I've had quite a range of that. I've had rape threats, obviously. Legal threats. I think one of the most stressful weeks of my life was when someone raised tens of thousands of pounds in like 24 hours to sue me basically for calling them out on the internet. They didn't go ahead, they wouldn't have got anywhere, but it's still incredibly stressful because the numbers involved in the money is quite a lot. I've got multiple online stalkers, which are horrible. I've been maliciously reported to the police. I've had 3 lifetime bans from Twitter. You can still follow me on Twitter, I am back. None for hateful conduct or anything. The first one I ever had was for discussing the C word with Australians, like some friends, because they obviously use it a little bit different to British people, and they kind of use it just instead of every single word. And anyway, I got suspended for that. I've been sent distressing images. In fact, just on the train on the way up here, a gender-critical man sent me a really gory picture of like a surgery photo of a penis. Disgusting, just happens all the time. And of course I've been called every name under the sun, which I've added here, but I feel like a lot of people, especially maybe people who aren't so involved in like minority rights activism, when they think of hate, they kind of just think of being called names. And it's not nice to be called names. And there are some, very inventive, horrible ways to describe people, but it's like the least bad bit out of all of those different things. But we'll get into more of this kind of stuff later. But it's not just me. Obviously I'm not unique. Well, maybe I'm uniquely hateable. But as being a prominent woman online at all, even if you're not doing politics, you still just get more hate. But this is specifically like a trans thing, as well as other minority groups. So just in fact, I do consider myself one of the lucky ones, because although I am a trans woman on the internet arguing during the trans panic, I'm an able person, I'm white, I have a place to live. There are lots of things that could make it a lot harder for me, because I would get a lot more abuse if I wasn't, who I am. And it's intersectional, this abuse, and it does stack up. And it's way, I guess it's easier for me than for many to do this kind of thing. So I don't think I'm, special in the fact that I've been hated upon or anything. It's very common for a lot of people. But here's some horrible statistics. So this first one is from Gallup, which is the most recent Gallup poll. It said 60% of trans people online have faced abuse. But I feel like, I'm kind of surprised it's not 100. But maybe this covers people who don't go on the internet, or just came out, or don't like to consider themselves as a victim of abuse and that kind of thing. But interestingly, the same study says 50% of trans people have experienced abuse from a transphobic activist, which I feel like is their code for gender critical, that seems reasonable. I think like half of all trans people have probably been targeted. It doesn't take long if you make an account and make it seem, I guess stealth people will probably be, they'll avoid some of it and stuff. But 41% of trans people have experienced a hate crime, which is a horrific statistic. That's actually the lower of the two estimates. That's the Stonewall estimate. The Gallup one is like 60% or something. I think when the media and opponents of trans rights like to portray us talking about hate crimes as like, oh, someone misgendered you once on the internet, and now that's suddenly a hate crime, and they're arresting a mother of 4 while she's cooking dinner. But when I'm talking about hate crimes, I experienced a hate crime. The last one was in 2019, and it was a situation where I had to, we basically ran for our safety, me and another trans woman, and that's the kind of thing that people are talking about, that list I just gave. So I guess I want to highlight that this name-calling thing it's such a minor thing, it happens to trans people so much that it's not a big deal in terms of, well, it's a massive deal, but it's compared to what we're discussing when we're talking about hate crimes. Anyway, sorry, didn't explain this well. But according to Brandwatch, 15% of all internet comments about trans people are hateful, compared to the baseline, which is 1% of all internet comments, estimated in several different studies, are abusive, just between people. So that goes from being 1 in 100 to 1 in 7 for trans people, the comments that you experience. So you can see why trans people might get this kind of, they feel a lot more hated on the internet because you just encounter it so much more, even if it's not being targeted at you. Every single comedy has some garbage thing, every single newspaper article is about it, it's just relentless. I've included this is mainly a talk about online discrimination and hate, but I just wanted to put in some examples of some real life stuff, just to highlight that this isn't all just internet abuse. The internet abuse is horrible, and it can be really serious, as we'll mention some later. But also, just to highlight, so 43% of UK employers say that they might not hire a trans this stuff is so extreme. 66% of trans people have been sexually assaulted, including myself. That's another one that I feel like how is it not higher, but I'm glad that there are people who escape there. And 36, so over a third of trans uni students have experienced negative comments from staff. Like, how are you supposed to get good education when the people who are meant to be teaching you are saying abusive things? Ridiculous. So thank you very much for the university for hosting me. But it isn't just, this stuff isn't just safety concerns, and it isn't just feeling sad. Like, if someone says something horrible about you, you have a bad day, and I think a lot of people just imagine like, oh yeah, I've had a situation where someone said something horrible to me online, and I got over it and stuff. But when it is relentless, it can actually affect your brain. It can change your brain structure. And like LGBT people in particular experience trauma from like adolescence onwards, and sometimes younger. It's very common, certainly growing up in the Section 28 era, to just, there'd be like no breaks on the sort of abuse of LGBT people from like the age of 10 or 11, as kind of the first time I started encountering it. And this relentless abuse shapes who you are as you grow up. And constant trauma can, causes your brain to produce chemicals like cortisol, for example, and that affects multiple parts of your brain. This constant trauma can cause damage to your amygdala and hippocampus and all these different parts. And like something I've experienced myself is this hypersensitivity where I've had phases, and luckily I've managed to get out of it, but I guess the first times that I was getting to a point where I was getting like constant hate, it built up my like anxiety, and I just had this like base level of panic where even if I wasn't online and I was with friends and I was distracted, I was doing something else, if just something small happened, I'd instantly go into fight or flight mode. This is the result of constant trauma changing your brain. And I think as well, obviously this is most damaging for young people whose brains are still developing. So online hate, it's more than just a bad day when someone says something horrible to you. Even, especially when it's like 15 times more likely for trans people, it's also causing damage to people's brains. So here's a guy from Chicago University who says, research has indicated that repeated exposure to traumatic events can lead to persistent and lifelong maladaptive coping mechanisms with specific impairment related to the control of one's cognitive processing, reasoning skills, and problem solving. So even if you don't care about LGBT people, we are like 5% of the country, and if we're having our it's kind of like a form of damage to your brain, which can affect your problem solving, that is bad for society. For you to allow this abuse to go on to LGBT people damages people around you and makes society worse for everyone. So this is more than just personal. Like, this stuff is I'm trying to hammer home how important combating hatred is. But anyway, those are quite heavy. Here is our first second cat break to that's the worst part of talking about hate overall. Here is Poppy on Christmas eating a Tesco's own salt and vinegar chipstick. She quite enjoys them. So I think another reason why I kind of feel qualified to be here, is that I feel like I can handle this stuff quite well. I was just saying about how I went through a kind of panic stage early on, but I feel like I've learned to deal with the amount of hatred that I get quite well. And I think every day I get a comment from, a message from someone saying, how do you handle this much abuse from people? And it does break a lot of people. It's broken me in the past. So I feel like I can explain, I'm not a qualified psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but I can explain what I do to handle, this constant onslaught, which may help you, hopefully. So the first thing I do is make sure that I address what is being said about me or to me rationally, because it's very easy to let your emotions respond to it, and I think that's totally normal, and you shouldn't punish yourself if your emotions do respond to something someone says. If someone says you're disgusting for being a trans person, or you're a child predator, or all the normal things they say about us all the time, it can make you feel horrible, but it can also make you feel make you doubt yourself. What if they're true, and your emotions can kind of carry you on this, especially if you get a huge internet pylon of 250 people. The worst one I ever had was actually 12,000 people when I said the Yorkie Bar advert was sexist. It was a bad day. But, yeah, anyway, I won't go off on that. But when they say something like this, it can be very easy to just kind of ride it emotionally, but it's better. The first thing I do is even sometimes say it out loud, is this true? Is this a fact? Do they have any evidence of this? Is this logically consistent? And the answer is, when it's hate, it's always no. And when you start feeling bad, you can say, it's okay for me to feel bad, but rationally, this emotion is wrong. It's incorrect. And that really does help me handle it. And the second thing is to get perspective. It can feel overwhelming as a trans person, or any LGBT person or any minority, to feel like there are so many people who are dedicated to ruining your life. There are people, this is their hobby, this is what they do after work. They campaign to take away trans people's rights. They just go online and find pictures of you, and they have a forum where they just laugh at trans people's surgery photos and stuff. It's overwhelming just thinking about how much hate there is for you. But the thing is, people hate all kinds of fucking stupid stuff. I am a woman who can drive, and that means there are millions of people on Earth who hate me for that. I'm an atheist. Some countries have the death penalty for atheists, and so they hate atheists. There are so many things about you that people hate, you don't worry about those things every day. Or I hope there are some things about you. I hope there are some things about you that are hated that you don't worry about. I know, but there are things that aren't constantly on your mind in the same way that I find trans issues are, and I remind myself that. And I also, imagine if you take something about yourself which is just an observable fact, but isn't socially controversial. For example, I'm right-handed. Imagine if you discovered this online forum with 15,000 members who were dedicated to ruining the lives of right-handed people, and they had this whole big thing being right-handed is a fetish, and they post pictures of right-handed people look, they're holding it with the left hand, but I bet they're faking it, they're a secret right-handed. If someone then came up to you in the street and they're you're a fucking right-handed, disgusting, you'd just be what? What are you on about? And that is, there's no difference between someone hating on you for being trans and someone hating on you for being right-handed. Rationally, there's no difference between those things. And just try and get in the mindset. Imagine, rather than them attacking you for something which you've been brought up to believe, is shameful and society does attack you for, just be okay, I'm imagining instead they're attacking me. Another thing, I have straight thumbs. Not many people have straight thumbs. Straight thumb supremacy. If you got curved thumb, I fucking hate you. So it's just stupid. Very important, I think, is to not do this alone. I found in lockdown, when I was on my own, it was so easy to run away with worrying about things because there was no one there to ground me. And I actually kind of have 3 different ways of connecting with people to deal with this. I post about it online, and that is actually the main thing that I like arguing with people, I'm kind of addicted to arguing, but also just venting. When someone writes this insane 9-tweet monologue about your genitals, sometimes you just have to post it and be everyone else sees this, right? This is fucking insane, right? And then people are oh, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It brings you down to earth. I also have close friends who are, do LGBT rights stuff or are just LGBT themselves, and they've experienced it or they've seen people experiencing it, and it means you can bomb with them, oh, you've had it before where someone's tried to do this, and they're yeah, I know that. And that can make you feel like you're not going for it alone. And last of all, I have friends in my sort of real life, day-to-day stuff who aren't hyper online like I am, and it's good to have people like that. They care about trans rights, they care about me as a person, but they're not in the trenches on the front lines. They don't know who Graham Linehan is, they don't care. And I think it's really good to just escape from this. And I find that, you know, one of the things, if I have a whole week where people are saying that, you know, all women hate trans people and like no one's ever going to love you and stuff, and then I go to the pub on Friday and then I just talk to random people and everyone's just kind of nice, and it brings you back to real life. And one thing on this escape it thing is, I think this was the last thing it took me to learn out of all of these, because I'm the kind of person who, when there's a problem and someone's like, oh, you know, just don't think about it, go to something else, I'm like, no, because that won't solve the problem. If someone is, you know, putting my address online or something, it doesn't solve the problem by me going away. So then I just attack it more and more and more, and lean more and more into it. But the thing is, having a break isn't just, you know, it's not like, oh, you can solve it by running away from that. What it is it's letting your brain reset, and it's letting you have more of a fresh mind, and lets you, you know, focus on it more, and it stops you from being tired out. So that's why having a break is important. And this is a quote from Munro Bergdorf. So Munro is more prominent than me, so she obviously gets more abuse from that. But she's also a model, and I feel like at least some models seem to get a lot more abuse from certain men. And she's also black, so she also gets so much racism. Like, I feel like maybe she even gets more racism than trans stuff, because she once did an interview where she said racism's bad, and people fucking hate her for that. She said, you have to be dead inside not to let it bother you, and it's made even harder when you experience it all the time, and the people perpetrating it don't seem to be sanctioned for their behaviour. I have totally given up on the idea that any transphobic people will ever face any consequences for what they do. I think if you're holding out for that, you're just going to get hurt. That isn't going to happen. How we are going to win as trans people is these insane obsessed transphobes are going to get bored of it, get old, lose the media's attention. They're not going to change, they're not going to stop, they're not going to face any consequences, and we are just going to slowly get more rights and slowly get more freedom from them. So I think that's how you should look at this going ahead, and not feel like there's something, you know, like, sorry, I shouldn't mention Graham Linehan twice, I had a really good day, but he keeps talking about the day when trans people will be vanquished and everything will be back to normal. That isn't going to happen. That's how cultists left the world. So so I feel like I'm very desensitized to it. Like Munro was just saying about how, you know, you have to be dead inside to not let it affect you, and that is true. Sometimes it gets to me. Not that frequently. I'm not bulletproof. I'm quite well armoured to it, but I'm very desensitized to it. And I think that there are pros and cons to being desensitized to it. The main pros are it helps me survive, as I've just been explaining. But it also helps me be able to understand it. Like, if you see someone being transphobic to you, almost as like a dog barking at you, that's just what dogs do, then you're more able to study it and understand it, which then helps you combat it. And I feel like that's why I'm able to be here, is that I'm so desensitized to this stuff. I feel like David Attenborough watching the people say abusive things about me. The main con, I think, is when you're super desensitized, it can super freak out, especially cis people. Like, your friends who aren't like into it. Like, I had an incident the other day when I was just with some of my friends, and everyone else there is cis person, and I got this comment, and there was a fucking weirdo writing this, like, imagined what my genitals were like, and he'd written this big long description of it, and I just thought it was hilarious. And I was like, ha, this guy's just written this fucking monologue about, you know, my genitals. And my friends are like, oh, let's hear it. And I read it out, and they looked like they were going to cry. And like, they're like, it's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, it's so weird, it's just kind of funny. But yeah, no, you are right, it's fucking horrific. But, yeah. And the other one we've already mentioned is it can change your brain. I mean, I don't know how much my brain has changed. I don't know. Made me into even more of a dickhead, but surviving. But it does allow you to do this. So this is sorry for anyone who's not really for slurs. This is why it's good to use different slurs. We can laugh at their stupid words for us. This is all the slurs that I can think of. You get 1 point for everyone you've ever been called. I think my score is 23. I haven't ever been called a he, she, or a shim. So if anyone wants to call me a shim afterwards, I can tick it off. I feel like gender bend was really old school. But yeah, I've sorted them into groups based on where I think these have come from. There's a lot of overlap. But yeah, you know, if you want to see this is see lots of people in photos. This is on Katy Shit Cartoons on Twitter if you're interested. But I recently, so these are like I feel like the 5 traditional groups of transphobes. But I recently got into transvestigators, and I fucking love transvestigators. And I've discovered the slurs EGI, which stands for elite gender invert, and flip-flop, which I think is a slur for like a couple, where it's like a trans man and a trans woman. But usually they pick like, you know, Michelle and Barack Obama, they're flip-flops because they're both secretly trans or whatever. Anyway, it's quite fun sometimes. But maybe you didn't enjoy it and you just need a drink, like probably looking at slurs like troon. I can't believe they call us troons, it's so embarrassing. Imagine saying that to your friends, like, oh yeah, I've been on the internet taking the piss of troons. And they're just like, okay. Weird. But where does all this online hate come from? So this is what I'm going to talk about, the gender critical movement. Really, I do want to emphasize though, that online hate isn't just from the gender critical movement. And while the media is attacking us and uses their narratives a lot, and there are a lot of gender critical people in the British media. There's so many fucking columnists I need to learn the names of, who I could not be bothered with otherwise. But they're not the ones who are in charge in government. Like obviously it's Conservative government. There are some gender critical people in the Conservative Party, but it's not the majority of it. And they're just kind of using it as a tool to get people to vote right wing. But I thought this was very interesting. I asked this poll, and it's a very UK phenomenon. So obviously like in the USA, it's mainly Republicans and the QAnon people and all those kind of wackos. Whereas here, I feel like gender critical is the majority. And I think if you're a British trans person or someone who's ever once said that you don't mind trans people existing, then you've probably had a pile on some kind of social media. And when you click on the profiles of the people doing it, they're all hashtag sex not gender. And once you see their like calling cards, no one is just a little bit gender critical. You're either fucking all in or you're normal. But so I guess I want to focus on the gender critical movement for a couple of reasons. And one is that I feel like, at least in the UK, the Republican position of let's just eliminate trans people, wipe them out completely, and they'll just say that on TV, like, oh, I think we should start hanging out with LGBT people or something. They'll say that on TV, and people here know that's fucking garbage, and it wouldn't fly in the Houses of Parliament, for now at least. And I don't think you could get away with saying that at university, whereas I think the gender critical narrative very much can be said on media, can be said in Parliament, can be said at university, and most people don't realise why it is so bad. So that's why I'm kind of focusing on this, to expose these arguments, and because that really is where just most of the online hate comes from. But anyway, if you don't know what gender critical is, this is kind of a reasonable summary of them. I think if you ask them, I think the main thing they would argue is that sex is binary and immutable. And that's like what Mayor Forstater argued in court, and one with defending this position as the gender critical position. They often say, I believe in basic biology, whatever that means. It's a very common thing for them to say. They absolutely fucking love definitions until you open the wrong dictionary and it doesn't say what they want. But adult human female is one of their calling cards, and they will maybe less now, but they used to say they were feminists all the time. And I think there are a lot who still see themselves as feminists or still introduce themselves as that, but a lot of the kind of bigger ones have kind of given up on it now, and it's folded in a lot more conservative, particularly conservative men who, they were all part of Gamergate and they fucking hated feminists, and then suddenly oh, it's changed, we're all pretending to be feminists now. Okay, yeah. But anyway, that's generally how you would see this. And the thing is, with this, and this is kind of a key theme of the gender critical movement, is if you step back from the context of trans rights and you just looked at this literally, you would just be like, okay, I mean, I guess biology's alright, I mean, sex isn't binary and immutable, but like, I don't really care if you think that, and I guess, I mean, I quite like women's rights, so, okay. So is it really a hate movement? I'm going to attempt to fully substantiate that claim that it is a hate movement. So I'm going to start here with an example. So this is a thing called the WDI Declaration. I guess it's a bit like PIN number because it stands for Women's Declaration International, and then I call it WDI Declaration. Anyway, WDI are one of the bigger gender critical groups in the UK. This declaration is a public declaration that anyone can sign, or any organisation can sign up to, and it has 34,000 signatures and 470 organisations. So this is quite big. I'm not trying to say that this isn't like, you know, talking about Christians and then or Catholics and pointing at the Pope, and he is like the kind of the de facto leader. WDI are not. They're not even the biggest gender critical organisation, but they are still a big deal, and a lot of people have signed up to this. This declaration is public, and it calls to remove basically all trans rights. It calls to ban all trans women and girls without exception from all women's spaces without exception, including toilets, changing rooms, and everything. It calls to remove protections from misogyny for trans women. Just pointlessly cruel. It calls to record trans women and girls rape victims as male, in order to hide the fact that misogyny is a component in these crimes. You know, it feels like pointlessly malicious for some of this stuff. They of course to legally protect parents who put their kids through conversion therapy because they don't believe that trans kids exist. And of course they call to ban all healthcare for trans people under 18, which is very extreme. So another point I guess I want to highlight being here at the university, and also the context of academic freedom, which is going to come up a little bit more later, is this declaration calls to ban research into trans women getting pregnant. Now I don't think it's not something like super close that's going to happen. There's probably not many people researching this, but it's an explicit call to ban a type of academic freedom. And this declaration also calls to ban any organisation that believes in gender identity, which by the way is like the NHS, the WHO, like every single major medical organisation in the world. They want to ban them from having any influence on trans healthcare at all. So this declaration is not compatible with academic freedom. We'll cover this more. But like, who has signed this? Because this is just one declaration, but this is this is such a common thing for people who have signed. Like, most of the time when I look up some gender critical person, they're on this fucking list. We're not going to go through the names of individuals, but so many other groups have signed this as well. Get the Hell Out, the one that did the BBC article about how trans women are raping lesbians. Object, Wolf, that's like kind of American one. Posey Parker's organisation, Standing for Women. LGBT Alliance, probably one of the biggest gender critical organisations. For Women's Scots, your local hate group. Labour Women's Declaration. Safe Schools Alliance, just some conservative group that somehow gender critical. Transgender Trend. Women's Rights Network. Spinster. Over It. Wild Woman Workshop, which is one that J.K. Rowling constantly promotes. Like, there are so many gender critical organisations that have signed up to this, and so many individuals. In fact, on my YouTube channel, there's a video of me confronting Dr. Kathleen Stock on this. Like, she was doing her kind of like, oh, I just have concerns about men in women's spaces. And I said, but you've signed this declaration calling to ban all trans women from all women's spaces. She's like, oh, I don't really care about toilets, and oh, I don't mind about real, true transsexuals who have transitioned. I was like, well, okay, but you have signed this declaration. Would you be prepared at least to say that part of it you don't agree with, or you regret that part, or you think this declaration is actually too extreme? And of course she's not, because she does, she's signed up to this declaration. I feel like this sums up the gender critical beliefs. I think that if you ask someone to say their views, a gender critical person, they will avoid it and say, oh, I just have concerns. But if you hammer them down and keep going for months, maybe weeks, hours, days, whatever it takes to get them to actually just agree to a position, these are the positions they will take. And there's some, there'll be some people say, oh, I don't think we should ban healthcare for all under 18s, or oh, we don't need to ban trans women from the toilets, but the majority of those positions are held by the majority of gender critical people, in my experience. But it's not just WI, they're not the only one, though WDI did write this. If you haven't read it, it's worth reading. Absolutely fucking wacky. For the first of 3 consultations for the Gender Recognition Act reform, they wrote this thing saying that trans people were the product of sissy hypno-porn, and all this other kind of weird stuff. But they said that, so there's this thing, it's CEWDAW, can't remember what it is now off the top of my head, but there's basically some international declaration trying to eliminate things, violence against women. And it's a very good declaration. I guess this is what WDI is in the style of. But they basically say we should eliminate all things that cause harm against women. And WDI argue that transgenderism is something that does that, so that needs to be eliminated. And like in a similar vein, Janice Raymond is one of the like OG gender criticals, before they were calling themselves gender criticals, who in her book, Transsexual Empire, it's a good title, from 1979 actually, so really ahead of the curve, she said, the problem of transsexualism is best served by morally mandating it out of existence. So that sounds, it's pretty good. Of course, probably one of the most prominent gender critical people today is Kelly J. Keane or Posey Parker. She's, I mean, picking a quote from her, which is extreme. There's a lot to choose from. She said on Twitter that she thinks all trans men should be sterilised. She's also the lady who said that she thinks men with guns should go into women's toilets to intimidate trans women. Pretty crazy. Julia Long, she's less relevant now. I guess she's kind of more one of the, I don't know how to describe it, cutting edge people. You know, she says the most extreme stuff. She, the LGBT Alliance Conference 2021, stood up and said, first she said that she doesn't think there's any such thing as a good trans person, and then that she said she doesn't think there are any trans people at all. To the whole room applauding. You know, no one called her out for that. RGT are kind of a smaller gender critical group, but they've said that they want to target 100% desistance, and for anyone who doesn't know, desistance is like convincing someone out of transitioning. They're kind of just talking about kids here, but also RGT are one of the ones who are saying they should ban trans healthcare for up to 25s. So, where to stop? And of course, the Helen Joy speech is probably one of the most recent extreme examples, where she said, she did this monologue, and she said that we have to reduce the number of trans people who transition, and she specifically said, including those who happily and unhappily transitioned, because we're all damaged and a huge problem to a sane world. So like these views are so extreme and they're so common. Like Helen Joyce is another very prominent gender critical person who I won't say any more about because I don't want to get sued. But these views are so common, and if you were to just meet a random gender critical person and say like, do you agree with this person when they say this? Do you agree with the WDI declaration? Do you agree with this other group which constantly works with all of these people and WDI? You know, do you agree? J.K. Rowling's constantly promoting people from all these various groups and stuff. Do you just disagree with them at least? And you won't get them to say it, not publicly. They wouldn't be able to say, I think the WDI declaration is extremist when it tries to ban all trans women and girls, even from the toilet. That is too far for me. They won't say that. You won't get them to say it. And I've tried. I've tried making friends with gender critical people. I've tried being confrontational. I've tried being friendly. I've tried absolutely everything for years. I've talked to some gender critical people every day for months, humanizing myself in an attempt to just get them to agree that some of this stuff isn't maybe the best. And you just can't do it. But this, I think, is so, like, this stuff is so extreme. How do they get away with it? And the reason is because when they go in the media, they don't say this stuff out loud. If they went and said, oh yeah, well of course my goal is to ban all trans women and girls from all women's spaces, including the toilets, as like the opening line, they know it sounds bad. It sounds bad. So instead they'll just say they have concerns about men in women's spaces. And that opens the conversation up a bit more, because then people who have no idea what's going on will be like, oh yeah, I don't want men in the women's toilets. I mean, I don't want men in the women's toilets. So that's a kind of reasonable position. And it's using these things called dog whistles or dog whistle politics. And it's basically where you say what, you don't say what you think, you don't say what you're trying to communicate directly, you come up with some other phrase which everyone who's on your side knows. They know what it means. And everyone who you're targeting knows what it means too. So for example, if you went into the toilet here and you saw a sticker that said sex matters on it, if you're a trans person, you would know that's a gender critical person who's gone in there and stuck it up to intimidate you. You know about it. If you're a gender critical person, you're like, oh, someone else has been here already. I know this, you know, I know what this phrase means. But most people will be like, sex matters, like, I guess I like having sex. I mean, I don't really care. They probably won't even clock what this means. And that's what these dog whistles are about. And the key things on this is you always have plausible deniability. You can always back off when you think that it looks bad for you. And you can always frame your opponents as hyperbolic and hysterical. And this happens to me so often, and it is so infuriating. I would say something like, oh, you know, gender criticals want to ban me from the toilets at work. And everyone's like, oh, you're so over the top, you're so crazy. Oh, Katy Montgomerie, she just says anything. And then I'll say, well, like, okay, here's this declaration, here's the person who signed it. Do you agree or not that this is what is being said? And they were like, I'm no longer going to reply to you. It's very infuriating. And it's just because they know it just looks bad. I don't have to hide anything I want. I just say what my demands are as a trans person. I don't need codes for any of that. And the other thing that I think helps them a lot is a progressive framing. And I think this is a general pattern we're seeing with conservatives in general, kind of the world over, including in the USA as well, which is where they're kind of using the language of the previous decade or so, like progressive movements, and turning it around. And like a good example is My Body, My Choice, which has been like a feminist slogan for abortion for a long time, and suddenly all the anti-vaxxers are saying it. And like it's bad faith using an argument that people have kind of already accepted and trying to use it for something else. And obviously gender critical, at least a lot in 2016, less so now sort of put itself forward as a feminist movement. And there are still some people who like have a feminist history in the movement. And that confuses people who don't know. And like if you're a random cis person, especially if you're a cis man, and you've got a trans person saying, you know, this person is transphobic, and then the other person said, no, I just care about women's rights. You're like, okay, I don't want to hurt trans people, I don't want to hurt women, I don't want to get involved in this, I'll just leave them to it. And then that benefits them, because then they get to do their hate speech stuff, and people aren't really taking that seriously. But I also think one of the most important things of this is it lets them convince themselves that it's a good thing. So, as I was saying, I've made friends with gender critical people before, including some of the bigger names, and like talked to them for, you know, months. And more than once I've got into the position where I've said, you know, like, I don't need you to say this for all trans people. I don't need you to make any general statement. Totally in private, I'm not going to screenshot this, I'm not going to record it. Do you still want to ban me from the toilets at work? Like, is that a thing you actually want? And several times, I can think of 3 occasions particularly, where they said, well, I'm really sorry, and it makes me feel really bad to say it, but yes. And I think, you know, in that situation, they know it's bad, but obviously that's what their belief is. But then they're probably in a situation where they're like, well, I'm telling my friend I want to, you know, mess her life up. Mess his life up. But at least if they say, oh, okay, well, it's for the greater good, this is for the rights of women, then, you know, you can kind of cast away this responsibility and bad feelings. And there's another cartoon on the room, as you can see from the artwork. It's pretty stellar. I think a lot of people think that the only three people in existence, the only three types of people are the first three. So there's people who are openly pro-trans rights. There are the people, like, sorry, more slurs, but like, they're just so funny. Like, lady boy is just such a stupid slur. And also, like, as an engineer and a guitarist, tranny has like 3 meanings. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said any of the slurs. Sorry if you get banned from YouTube, whoever's hosting this. So, like, these people I don't care about. Like, if they're going to say something rude or crude or like say some slur and they don't really mean it and they're not trying to take away my human rights, yeah, I'd rather they didn't. Like, read a book. But like, okay. And the people who are just calling us slurs and want to ruin our lives, you know, the kind of like Westboro Baptist Church types, they are grim. Like, definitely bad, but I still don't think they're as bad as the people who have the same beliefs as them, but hide it and try and act as they're like the first person on the left. And they're like, oh yeah, of course I support trans rights. I just have some concerns. And then after talking to them for like 3 months, you get to the bottom and it turns out they've already signed the WDO declaration. They've been lying the whole time. It's very tedious. So maybe this bit's going to be a bit controversial. If you do have gender critical colleagues or friends, they're probably nice to you. That's fine. I'm sure lots of them are very nice people if you're a cis person. But I just ask them, like, do you agree with this declaration? Like, do you condemn these people saying these really extreme things? Are you able to publicly say that you don't think this is good or this person's an extremist? Or, well, if you are willing to say that you think the whole declaration's a load of garbage and, you know, these people are really extreme and all this kind of stuff, then what makes you gender critical? Like, if you don't want to ruin trans people's lives, why are you calling yourself gender critical? Why are you giving your clearly better position and your credibility to the rest of these people? And if you can't condemn it, well, then there you go. Now you know what they stand for. But you don't have to get in confrontations with people if you don't want to. Anyway, here's Poppy again in a box. Yay, she's lovely. So, how do we beat hate? The first thing I think is recognizing it and not letting people get away with dog whistles and calling out to people who don't understand them. So I've got some examples here. For example, like, these are all classic gender critical things like sex matters, they just mean your birth sex. Homosexual means same-sex attracted. I need to explain this because I know this one. This is one of their favourite ones. Is what they actually mean is when they say it to me, they're saying it is gay men who are attracted to you and not straight men. That is like what is being said. They think sexuality is just based on your birth sex. Now, obviously, in how real life works, the thing is when they say homosexual means same-sex attracted, and you're like, you know they're gender critical, so you react to like, oh, fuck off. And then they say, you must be homophobic. And they can show to everyone else, and everyone else is like, well, that is what it means, isn't it? And like, yeah, it is. That is what it means, unless you have some belief that someone has basically like a sex essence that they were given at conception, which is really what you're attracted to. It's like, though I did have a guy yesterday say that he could smell chromosomes, so you never know. But defend women's sports. None of the people who say defend women's sports give a flying fuck about women's sports. They don't care about funding issues or coaches sexually assaulting girls into, you know, athletics and stuff. They don't care. What they mean is, I don't want trans women playing football at the park. The classic adult human female just means trans women shouldn't have rights. Keep prison singles. Lots of these, like keep, defend sex-based rights. They like to frame it as though they're the ones on the defense. They're the ones trying to protect and status quo. But like, for something like protect single-sex spaces, trans women have used women's spaces since, longer than anyone here has been alive. That's the status quo. We've had legal protection to do so since 1999. So when they're saying protect single-sex spaces, I mean, you're not protecting what we already have, you're protecting this thing that you've decided is how it should be. So actually it's not protecting, you are the aggressor. If you're trying to change things and take away people's rights, exploratory therapies and classics, conversion therapy, watchful waiting, that's also another similar one. So the next most important thing, I think, once you've called it out and shown people what everyone's actually saying, I would just wish everyone would just say their beliefs up front. It would just be so much easier. Is that education does make a big difference. I won't go into this loads, but contact theory there was studies, some guy came up with this idea that just by exposure to people, you're more likely to be tolerant of them and treat them like other people. And they did this study, like one of the original ones was, they got a bunch of Catholic cis boys, because every study is just on cis boys, and men, and they just split them arbitrarily into two groups and had them camp in different places, and they did like challenges, and just from being separate, being pitted against each other in like friendly challenges, they got really like violent, and they started vandalizing each other's camps and like being really horrible to each other. And then when they put them all together for a little while and made them camp together and work on a task together, the hate all just went away. But this has been verified like loads, like hundreds of studies, and showing that like originally the first one was to compare to stuff for racism, but they've shown that it's true for like all kinds of things, including sexism, which is really interesting. There was one study I was reading where they had some schools, and they basically got the teachers to not use gendered language, but to just highlight the fact that kids were girls or boys. So they would say good boy or good girl, or they would get all the girls to sit on one side and all the boys to sit on the other side, and that kind of thing. And just highlighting what they were caused sexism in those classes to increase, because people realised that they were in a group, and then they learned what the stereotypes of those groups were, and they learned the hierarchy from just having the existence of it reinforces it to them all the time. So this is how I think gay people won gay marriage and kind of won against the gay panic, which like 20 or 30 years ago was just by knowing people. Like when you get to the point where most people know a gay person and they're just a normal person, then it's so much harder to hate them. It's so much harder to believe all this garbage propaganda. And that is how trans people are going to win long term. It's just going to be another decade yet. But here's an example. This is a study that actually the BBC commissioned, and they never published this bit because the BBC doesn't like trans people. But I mean, it's quite clear here that if you don't know anything about trans rights, then I mean, all these numbers are quite depressing, but you're about as likely to want to ban me from the toilet at work as you are to not. But if you know trans people, if you know about trans rights, or if you're related to one, then massively there's support for trans people using, or trans women using women's facilities. It makes a difference. There's another cat. So by the way, pro tip, as well, if you follow Poppy on Instagram, hashtag cats in sinks. It's a good hashtag. That's quite fun. Also cats on glass tables. They like up underneath. It always feels a bit violating, but it's a good. Now this is a controversial one. Deplatforming. So, deplatforming, is it controversial? Well, so there was a thing a while ago at this university where some gender critical people wanted to watch a gender critical film, and basically there was a protest and they managed to block them, and some of the people involved in that might be in the audience right now. Shout out to them. And so they got deplatformed. And the Edinburgh Academics for Academic Freedom Twitter account was not happy that I got to do a talk and they didn't get to watch their film. The framing of gender critical people as hateful, as aggressive, like, if you're not hateful, then it won't happen. No, but I feel like this kind of, this is the kind of thing that they try and get away with by saying like, oh, it's so ridiculous, Katy is going out of her way to paint us as aggressive and be horrible. But like, the stuff we just looked at from this WGI declaration and other things, how could you not describe this as hateful? I just think that's a completely reasonable description of the situation. But they don't want to be associated with it because it's really important for like the propaganda of the gender critical movement. Sorry, this is quite funny. But so I guess one of the main things here is they're trying to make this an academic freedom thing. And so we'll come on to more, I think it's the next one. No. Okay, so there's this kind of idea that the more people you let talk, the more academic freedom you have. If You know, everyone talks all the academic freedom, and that just isn't true. If you have a university where you constantly are inviting misogynistic dickheads to come and talk about how women are inferior and how they shouldn't even be at university and they shouldn't be able to drive and all this kind of stuff, of course women academics are going to be able to participate in, you know, they're not going to feel safe to participate in the conversation, they're not going to feel free to be, you know, at lectures and stuff, and of course it's going to reduce their, you know, wants to participate.
Is there somebody chairing this event, please?
Anyway, we'll move on. So I'm going to give an example. Well, actually, I just want to finish the point of if you allow hate to speak, then people will be intimidated out of contributing. And if you silence hate, silence is the word they like to use, but if you just stop hate being spread, then people in minority groups are more free to talk and say their mind, and it brings more academic freedom. But I do want to give an example of when deplatforming, I think, is unambiguously good. So an example, Kiwi Farms. Kiwi Farms is a stalking website. It's directly led to suicides. They host Nazi content. They've live streamed the Christchurch shooting. Really fucking grim stuff. Talk about it in a sec. Feared by journalists. But they basically, Kiwi Farms used to go for everyone, and they kind of pivoted to just going for trans people. And they have like a list of trans people they would go for. They went for this lady, who's also known as Keffels on Twitter, Clara Sorrenti. They swatted her, which is where you find someone's address, you dox them, and then you tell the police that there's a life hostage situation or something, and they send in people with big guns to storm into your house, and people die from this, because if someone just suddenly storms into your house, especially if you're in America and you have a gun, maybe you want to defend yourself, and you get shot by the police. This stuff is fucking horrific. She stood up to Kiwi Farm, which is like, you know, Keffels is kind of controversial online, but mad respect for her for having the guts to stand up to this like horrific abuse, and got their basically the people who are keeping them on the internet dropped them, and loads of other people dropped them, and the website is kind of dead now. It does keep kind of coming back a little bit, but the further you push this out in the mainstream, the more this is deplatformed, the less people contribute to it, and this, regardless of whether you agree with deplatforming or not, it does work. So for example, Britain First, I don't know if anyone remembers Britain First from back in the day, like Brexit times, they used to have 1.8 million people on Facebook following them, and when they got kicked off Facebook, they went to Gab, which is like one of the Nazi Twitters, and now they have like 10,000 followers. Milo Yiannopoulos is like a right-wing voice who says, and he's doing the Kanye West tour at the moment. He was complaining that he doesn't make any money anymore because he got deplatformed from all the big platforms, which means that he's just left with the weirdos who follow him on all the small ones, and they don't donate money. Tommy Robinson, once he got banned from Twitter and Facebook, though I guess he's back on Twitter now, thanks Elon. His rallies went from tens of thousands of people to hundreds, so it made a real world, real life difference. And kind of going arm in arm with that is defunding these hate groups and people, because they need money to act. I mean, lots of them are professional. There are professional gender critical people who just go around saying gender critical things and make money off it, or do a huge crowdfunder and then disappear with the money. Scotland at least has one example. But anyway, so there is examples of defunding these people does make a difference as well. So the editor of Daily Mail was actually changed, like the Daily Mail admitted it in part due to Stop Funding Hate, which is a UK campaign group, getting all the advertisers pulled, which is pretty cool. Also, the editor of the Express said that they were going to tone down the Islamophobia because of Stop Funding Hate, though I think maybe they have a new editor now and they've toned it back up, but I don't know. GB News said that all their advertisers pulling out had really limited how outlandish they could be, which I think we all know what that means. And also, similarly, Sleeping Giants, so like Stop Funding Hate for the US. Steve Bannon said, so he's a Trump guy, I don't know if you've heard the name. I feel like doing this stuff means I know all these people's names, like I know who these fucking weirdos are. If you don't know, don't find out, it's not worth it. But Sleeping Giants cost them 90% of their revenue in 1 year by just getting advertisers to stop advertising with them. So Richard Wilson, who's the organizer of Stop Funding Hate, said to me, I've been involved in campaigning for 20 years, but I've never seen a tactic that has made such a big impact as this, even when it's just like run by a group of volunteers. So this can make a difference. This is my last cat break, so I'm just going to wrap up. So what have we learned? We've learned that hate affects every trans person you know. Gender critical is a hate movement. They use dog whistles to hide what they're doing. Education can combat prejudice, and it makes a big difference. That's how we're going to win. Deplatform does work even if you don't like it, and cutting funding makes a big difference. And last of all, love wins. Here's all my references. If you would like to see them, you can email me and I will send them to you, which you can find on my website, katymontgomerie.com. Here's Poppy's Instagram. And now is my time to say thank you very much. If you have any questions, I hope you like.
Questions in the room. We have 15 minutes only because this room is prepared until 9 p.m. We cannot go over that, okay? When you ask your questions, please respect, dignity, and tolerance. Remember that, okay? I want as much as people asking questions freely. Remember, you're addressing somebody who also has feelings that we feel a lot about hate. Personally, I had my doors for all sides, but I survived them. First questions, I'm waiting. Shireen.
Hi, thanks.
Hello.
Hello. First of all, before I say anything, I think the hate that you described is terrible and shouldn't be allowed, and it's horrible, and nobody should have to face that, no matter what their political views. So I don't endorse that for a second. As you've probably guessed by now, as a gender critical person, I actually, sorry? Am I,
we can't hear you.
No.
Directly into it.
Yeah,
like that?
Yeah.
I think it might have turned it off.
I don't know how to turn it on.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I think that there's probably 3 points I want to make, with a question kind of in that. First of all, you challenged us to ask GC people what their views are. So I can tell you what mine are, and this isn't a dog whistle. This really isn't. This is what I think. You had a few views up. I think that sex is dimorphic, it's fixed. I also think it's politically relevant. So I think it has social and political consequences, and those consequences matter. They matter particularly to women, not only to women, but they do matter particularly to women's rights. And in order to protect women's rights, we need to have language that does that. We need to have the language to do it. We need to have clear concepts. So yeah, that is basically what I think. Now that's not saying that trans-identifying people don't have rights either.
You want to ban trans women from women's toilets?
Well, I don't know. Please let me finish.
So that is what you mean.
Please, will you let me finish?
I'll let you finish, but that is what you mean.
What I mean is there need to be spaces that are single sex. Now, I think what you get to is a situation with conflict of rights. So that a conflict of rights, some women need, because sex is relevant in a lot of women's lives, yes, gender identity is also relevant to some people. Sex isn't relevant to everybody, but for a lot of women it is. So what I think you need, when you've got a conflict of rights, and you've got some women who still need single-sex toilets, and if you have trans women in that space, they're not single-sex anymore. If you still need that, and you have some trans-identifying people who are uncomfortable in the toilet associated with their sex, then you need a third space. You know, you need to hang on.
That is what you just said, isn't it? Yeah, but you're just saying the same thing. You just want to ban trans women from the toilet.
So what I think we should have are
It's literally what I said in the
solutions.
presentation.
What I think you should have, what I think we need are solutions that respect everybody's rights and give everybody, if not exactly what they want, give everybody something that keeps them safe and a solution they can live
Like
with.
what we have to do.
Now, what you did with the WDI, I've just been having a quick scan through, it's quite long as you know, the WDI declaration. It doesn't say the things you said. I hope people here will go and read it.
Shireen, we need to coordinate this. Katy, please. Okay, Shireen, you ask your question and answer. Okay?
Okay, but to frame my question, what we've heard is a lot of distortions from the declaration. There were a lot of things that are taken out of context and distorted, so I hope people here will read it. So
Just please do.
The question I want to ask is, when conflicts of rights exist, to my mind, and you know, why we wanted to show the film that we showed, we wanted to have genuine discussion, because what I think needs to happen is people with diverse views who aren't going to agree on some things. In a liberal pluralist society, we have irreconcilable views on lots of things.
No, I'm not allowing anything else. This is the last time, Shireen. I want your question now.
I'm getting to my question.
No. I want a question now.
Okay, so my question is, would it not be more productive to try to find where we can seek commonalities and seek ways through the things we disagree with, rather than framing this as a hate movement who must never be heard and to whom you can never speak?
Thank you, Katy.
Yeah,
I'm so bored of hearing the
No.
I do think it's important to try and find common ground with people. And you know, this is what I was doing, particularly at the start when I was doing this stuff online. There's this guy in America called Daryl Davis, and he's a black man, and he basically tries to make friends with people in the Ku Klux Klan, and by humanizing himself, he's managed to de-radicalize them. I'm not saying that you are, I'm saying he was a hero of mine, because he went to people he thought hated him, and did hate him, and he changed their mind through talking to them and finding common ground with them. So I thought, and I'm not saying that you're the same as the Ku Klux Klan, I'm saying that there were people who I perceived to hate me, and I thought, well, the only reason they can hate me is because they don't know that I'm just a normal person too. So I attempted to find common ground with them. And I think that you can find some common ground. As a feminist, I can find common ground with people with feminist backgrounds, particularly when they are like a TERF, with a radical feminist background, as opposed to a gender critical who's maybe just a conservative. And when we do find common grounds, like I very passionately support bodily autonomy, for what, you know, which involves abortion. You know, abortion's like the biggest women's issue there is. And if we can agree on that, that's great. But then if we have like a situation where, for example, there might be a gender critical person who is just anti-abortion, and I can say, okay, this person's anti-abortion, so maybe you can team up with me against them on abortion, and you can team up with them against me on me going to the toilet. But that never happens, because gender critical, like class solidarity, is it's the strongest force. And when you're hanging around with these extremists, like you might say, oh well, I don't want to ruin trans people's lives, but there are lots of gender critical people who do, and if you're not ready to call them out, how can we have this discussion? How can we even start it if we're not ready to draw a line on the extremists?
Katy, your question?
Thank you. Coming up.
That's the job.
Hello. My name is Kate Davison. I'm a lecturer in history of sexuality here at Edinburgh. New position just created this year. There are two of us. The other one just started last week, so please come and take our subject with us. I'm also a historian of sexual science, sexology, and the history of conversion and aversion therapies. That's my area of expertise. My question to Katy is why gender criticals and TERFs never talk about trans men?
Well, they do only talk about trans boys when talking about trans kids. So you have this kind of dichotomy when talking about trans kids, they're always talking about confused lesbians. You know, every single trans man is just a poor, young, confused lesbian, even the ones who aren't attracted to women. But when you get to adults, the only trans people they seem to talk about is the scary men in dresses. And there's a reason, there's a few reasons behind this, and I think it's what sells to the public. It's very much, to sell fear of trans people, the best way to sell this kind of fear is a scary man in a dress because, you know, they're selling this to men. The majority of people who oppose trans rights are men. Most people with gender critical aligned views are men, and most people who support trans rights are women. So to sell this to these men, if they can sell this idea of, you know, someone's going to chase your wife down wearing a dress or whatever, it's scary. And also the idea of your sweet innocent daughter being torn away from you and turned into this disgusting, you know, like, man, is a way of selling fear. But also it's just a way of, like, kind of reinforcing this patriarchal idea of trans men don't have their own agency because they're just women who are confused. So, you know, they're just silly, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're doing. But trans women instantly have agency. From the moment they're just, you know, like, could be perceived as a man, perhaps as like a 15-year-old boy or something, maybe before they transition or maybe while they're transitioning, they then do have the agency and they can be blamed for their actions. There was another point that I wanted to add. I think.
Okay, your question?
Thank you.
Don't make it an argument.
No, it's a slightly nested question, but it is directly inspired by what I've witnessed today. If somebody wants to reach common ground with you, do you not believe that they would start the conversation with a question rather than a counter debate? And therefore, that led me to reflect on one of the main things that gender critical people tend to weaponize, and that's their access to time and energy to debate certain topics in an academic style. Now, I'm at the stage now where I have heard it all before, but I know that to enter into such a debate would cost considerable time and energy and take us long past 9 o'clock. So my question to you is, how do you deal with that kind of angle?
So, I guess your first part, if someone wanted to find common ground with trans people, they wouldn't call us trans-identified persons, they wouldn't describe our genitals as mutilated and all these other kinds of things which are so dehumanizing. Like, in order to not deal with how dehumanizing this is, I just have to back away from it. You know, it's one of the things that can get to me is when they talk about us like worse than animals. Just saw an article today from one of the hate groups where they're saying like, oh, you know, trans people overblowing trans women committing suicide in men's prisons just for politics.
And
so,
the time and energy?
No.
Yeah. So that's just to answer the first part. But in the time and energy thing, personally, I am addicted to arguing. I kind of enjoy it. I feel like I'm very easily lured into it, and I have unlimited stamina for it.
Okay,
like,
thank you.
I could argue for
Question.
Hello.
Hello.
So I am a trans man, which I think it would be good to kind of expand on the different issues we have
Yeah.
here. So we definitely talk about trans men. My Twitter comments are an absolute cesspit all the time, have them sexualise me, infantilise me. I think that's very interesting about the dynamic between trans men and trans women, because ultimately it's the same villain, if you will, the same fight, but very different situations where trans women are, more demonised, whereas trans men are infantilised. And that kind of relates to other struggles as well. So I was wondering what you think about how the trans struggle kind of relates to other struggles that exist in the world, such as anti-homelessness, anti-capitalism, anti-politicality, wherever you stand on those issues, but how do they intersect?
Yeah, so I guess with anything like this, it all intersects and it all adds up, and I don't want to see it as like, what I really don't like is oppression points where like, oh, you're a trans person, you have it bad, well they're a trans person, and like, a traveller, and so they have it twice as bad as you. That's just nonsense. That isn't a good way to look at this at all. And it's also rubbish to say like, oh, who has it worse? Do Asian people have it worse than gay people? Or like, that is another garbage way. But it's important to look at these struggles and see that they do intersect, so that we don't, like, I think a really good example is from Bell Hooks, one of her books, where she's talking about how there was the feminist movement and there was the black rights movement. And the feminist movement only really cared about white women, and the black movement only really cared about black men. So where did black women have to go? Because whenever they went to the black rights movement, there was misogyny. And whenever they went to the feminist movement, racism was tolerated. So we need to be intersectional to understand this stuff happens, so we can listen to these groups. But just to say very quickly how this intersects, there are some things like, for example, travellers' rights, which I'm quite ignorant of, which don't, they aren't necessarily part of the same force so explicitly in my mind, and perhaps travellers would disagree, and if so, I would love to hear. But in terms of gay rights, trans rights are obviously super tied, and also women's rights. All three of these are, part of patriarchy's attempt to control people and get them to fit into strict boxes, to get sex to be a binary thing and it can't change, so that there's a clear hierarchy.
Okay, Katy, online questions.
Okay.
Today is the Holocaust Memorial Day, with several more panics, trade union under threat, and with Section 35 impacting democracy. Are we seeing fascism rise again in the UK?
Yeah, I think we have been heading that way. I do feel like the Boris Johnson government was heading that way. I feel like it was our version of the Trump government. The Trump government was definitely fascism. When British people do things, they do it, compared to Americans, much more subtly. But sometimes that can be more insidious and sometimes less. Like I was saying, people who don't say their views out loud kind of can be more dangerous. I don't know with this current government. I do feel like I am hoping that we're going to have, a sort of swing to the left reaction, a bit like the USA has had. But fascism is definitely the Overton window has shifted. The Overton window is like the range of acceptable political positions, and saying fascist things is now much more accepted than it would have been in the
So, J.K. Rowling is a huge donor of this university. How do you feel about speaking at university to support that? J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, well, I mean, donating to education is good. So, I'm glad she doesn't just hoard all of her wealth. So, I'm glad that I'm able to talk here, and that's good. I'm not really going to thank her for it. I don't really feel like it's a conflict or anything. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have an issue with it.
I think you need to approach at the end, because this is the time for us. We're finishing. Kathy, thank you very much for being tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And did you actually have to be out quite promptly? Thank you, everyone. You can be expeditious about that.